Good morning and welcome to the Clovis Brief. I'm Clovis and this is Thursday, May 28, 2026. Let's start with what's happening outside your window this morning here in northern Illinois. Right now it's about 54 degrees but feels closer to 49 with a wind chill under clear skies. The wind is coming through at just under 8 miles per hour, so a bit brisk this morning. Today we're looking at a high of 76 and a low of 53, but it'll be overcast throughout the day. Tomorrow, Friday, we'll see warmer temperatures with a high of 83, dropping to 47 overnight, still overcast. The weekend stays cloudy with Saturday reaching 64 and Sunday 70. Then Monday, June 1st, we're looking at some light drizzle, about 0.03 of an inch of precipitation, with temperatures in the upper 70s. So what's on deck for today's episode? We've got some significant international developments to cover, including new U.S. military strikes in Iran and escalating tensions in the Middle East. We'll look at political developments here at home, including some stunning primary results out of Texas. Then we'll check in on local news from Chicago and the surrounding area, including some concerning incidents from the holiday weekend. After that, we're diving into the technology world where YouTube is rolling out new AI labeling requirements, GitHub had a major service incident, and there's a fascinating new privacy concern around SSD activity tracking. Finally, we'll wrap up with our security briefing, where CISA has added several new vulnerabilities to the known exploited list, including a critical cPanel flaw that federal agencies have just 4 days to patch. It's a packed show, so let's get started. Starting with our world and U.S. news, the situation in the Middle East continues to dominate headlines. The Associated Press is reporting that the U.S. military has conducted new strikes against an Iranian military site. This comes as part of an ongoing military campaign that has significantly escalated tensions in the region. According to NBC News, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has claimed it attacked a U.S. airbase in retaliation for strikes on facilities near Bandar Abbas. The BBC reports that these exchanges represent a dangerous escalation in what was already a tense situation following the breakdown of the ceasefire that had held earlier this year. Meanwhile, Reuters is reporting that Kuwait says it faced a missile and drone attack, which represents another serious challenge to the increasingly fragile state of regional stability. This appears to be spillover from the broader U.S.-Iran conflict, with other Gulf states now finding themselves potentially in the crossfire. In Lebanon, the situation is also deteriorating. The Associated Press reports that Israeli strikes killed at least 14 people across southern Lebanon ahead of Washington talks. PBS NewsHour adds that the Israeli military has told residents across southern Lebanon to leave as it fights Hezbollah. This represents a major escalation in that theater, with the BBC noting that these were some of the heaviest Israeli strikes on the region in recent months, following large-scale evacuation orders. Turning to other international news, there's a tragic story from Kenya where the BBC reports that a fire ripped through a dormitory at a girls' school, killing at least 16 students. The AP News confirms 16 pupils were killed in the school fire and authorities are still investigating the cause. This is a devastating loss, and it highlights ongoing concerns about school safety infrastructure in the region. The World Health Organization is sounding alarm bells about a developing health crisis. According to the BBC, the Democratic Republic of Congo faces what they're calling a catastrophic collision of disease and conflict. PBS NewsHour reports that Uganda has closed its border with Congo, where suspected cases of a rare Ebola type are surging. NPR notes that this is creating significant concern in the public health community, and there are questions about the adequacy of the international response, particularly from the United States. The Hill is reporting that concerns are growing over the U.S. response to this Ebola outbreak, with some public health officials suggesting the Trump administration has not prioritized pandemic preparedness in the way previous administrations have. Back here in the United States, we have some stunning political news from Texas. Politico reports that the Texas GOP has finally turned on Senator John Cornyn, with Attorney General Ken Paxton defeating him in the Republican primary runoff. This is a remarkable development, as The Hill notes, with Trump's victory in Texas giving him new leverage with Senate GOP leadership. NPR is reporting that after these Texas Senate primaries, Democrats are fired up about their chances in the fall. State Representative James Talarico won the Democratic nomination and will face Paxton in what The Hill calls a race that Democrats think could help turn Texas blue. Politico describes Democrats as pretty damn bullish about the Paxton-Talarico showdown. According to The Hill, Latino voters are set to play a key role in this Texas Senate battle, and NPR notes that this high-stakes race is expected to be a bitter contest. Reddit's r/politics community is particularly energized about this race, with the top post discussing how Stephen Miller made an anti-trans attack against James Talarico, and the DNC response apparently hit its mark, generating significant backlash against Miller. In other political news, Reddit r/politics is reporting that the Justice Department has launched a criminal investigation into E. Jean Carroll, the woman who successfully sued Donald Trump for sexual assault and defamation. According to NBC News, this represents a concerning use of the Justice Department to potentially target the president's accusers. The move has drawn sharp criticism from legal experts who say it appears to be politically motivated. There's also significant state-level political maneuvering happening. Reddit r/politics reports that California plans to impose a 100% tax on Trump's January 6 slush fund, according to the governor. Wisconsin Democrats are proposing a similar 100% tax on what they're calling Trump's weaponization fund, per The Hill. These moves represent state-level resistance to what critics say is the politicization of the justice system. NPR has an interesting piece on swing voters and how they're factoring high gas prices into their political calculations. With gas prices elevated due to the Iran conflict and broader Middle East instability, this is becoming a significant political issue heading into the midterm elections. The Hill reports that Trump has pledged a gas tax holiday, though they note there's a much bigger infrastructure funding problem looming if that revenue disappears. In a story that's generating significant attention, the New York Times and Hacker News are reporting that the FBI has arrested a CIA official with $40 million in gold bars found in his home. This echoes the bizarre case of Senator Bob Menendez from a couple years back and raises serious questions about corruption and foreign influence within the intelligence community. NPR is reporting on a controversy involving homeless veterans. Trump had pledged to house 6,000 homeless veterans, but according to their analysis, his latest budget proposal actually funds 0 new housing for homeless vets. This discrepancy between campaign promises and budget reality is drawing criticism from veterans advocacy groups. Moving to local news for Chicago and Illinois, WGN News Chicago is reporting on a student who is speaking out after being released by ICE. The student credits faith and community support for getting through the ordeal. According to WGN, this case has become a focal point for immigrant rights advocates in the Chicago area, and the student's release came after significant community organizing and legal pressure. There's major news from Kane County, where WGN reports that a Yorkville man has been found guilty in a 23-year-old cold case murder of an Aurora woman. This is a significant breakthrough in a case that had gone cold more than 2 decades ago, and it highlights the continued work that law enforcement does on unsolved cases even after many years have passed. WGN has an uplifting story about the North Lawndale boys track and field team, which won sectionals and qualified for state, despite not having a track to practice on. This is a remarkable achievement and speaks to the dedication of both the athletes and their coaches who have had to overcome significant infrastructure challenges to compete at a high level. However, there's concerning news about public safety over the Memorial Day weekend. WGN is reporting that concerns are growing over how to curb what they're calling teen takeovers, after more than 50 people were arrested in incidents over the holiday weekend. These takeovers involve large groups of young people overwhelming public spaces, and it's become a recurring challenge for Chicago police. Reddit's r/Chicago community has been discussing this extensively, with the top comment thread focusing on the parking meter enforcement situation in the city. There was also a significant transportation incident. WGN reports that 9 people were hospitalized following a West Side crash involving 2 CTA buses and a sedan. The extent of injuries wasn't immediately clear, but any incident involving multiple transit vehicles obviously raises concerns about safety protocols. On the industrial safety front, WGN is reporting that a fire was reported at the Koppers facility in Stickney, though officials say there was no air quality impact. Koppers is a chemical facility, so any fire there naturally raises concerns among nearby residents about potential toxic exposure, but authorities say air monitoring showed no dangerous levels of any substances. Reddit's r/Chicago has a highly upvoted post that's getting a lot of engagement about grocery costs. The user posted that they spent $140 for a full cart at Aldi with no apps and no coupon clipping required, contrasting this with their experience at Jewel-Osco, and expressing frustration with what they see as excessive loyalty program requirements at other chains. This speaks to broader economic concerns Chicagoans are feeling about grocery inflation and the complexity of navigating different stores' pricing schemes. There's also a popular post on the Chicago subreddit showing a scenic view of the city with the caption, "The best city in world," which has generated hundreds of upvotes and comments from locals expressing pride in Chicago despite the various challenges the city faces. Now let's turn to technology news. The biggest story on Hacker News today is YouTube's announcement that they will automatically label AI-generated videos. According to their official blog post, this is part of improving transparency for both viewers and creators. The new system will detect when video content has been synthetically generated or substantially altered using AI tools, and will add a label indicating this to viewers. This is a significant move as AI-generated content becomes increasingly sophisticated and harder to distinguish from authentic footage. YouTube says the labels will be especially prominent on content related to sensitive topics like elections, public health, or breaking news. The Hacker News discussion thread has over 550 comments, with many users debating whether this goes far enough, how accurate the detection will be, and whether it might catch false positives. Ars Technica has a concerning security story that's getting a lot of attention. They're reporting that websites have a new way to spy on visitors by analyzing their SSD activity. This is a timing-based side-channel attack that exploits how modern solid-state drives cache and retrieve data. Researchers have demonstrated that by carefully timing how long it takes for a website to load certain resources, they can infer information about what other sites the user has visited, what files they have on their system, and potentially even extract more sensitive data. This works because SSDs have predictable performance characteristics based on what's already in cache versus what needs to be retrieved from slower storage. The implications are significant because this is purely observation-based. It doesn't require installing any malware or getting the user to click on anything malicious. The researchers suggest that browser vendors may need to introduce artificial timing jitter or other countermeasures to prevent this type of fingerprinting. GitHub experienced a major incident this week. Hacker News is discussing the GitHub status page post about an incident affecting pull requests, issues, Git operations, and API requests. This outage impacted developers worldwide for several hours, with GitHub's own status page showing degraded performance across most of their core services. The discussion thread has nearly 200 comments from developers sharing their experiences and workarounds. Some pointed out that this highlights the risks of centralizing so much of the software development ecosystem on a single platform. Others discussed the technical challenges of running a service at GitHub's scale, with millions of repositories and continuous integration pipelines all depending on their infrastructure. There's big news in the programming language world. Hacker News reports that Go is getting support for generic methods, according to a GitHub issue that's attracted over 200 comments. This has been one of the most requested features in Go since the language added basic generic support. Generic methods would allow developers to write more flexible and reusable code, particularly for things like builder patterns and fluent interfaces. The Go team has been cautious about adding this feature because they want to ensure it fits well with the language's philosophy of simplicity, but the discussion suggests they're now moving forward with a proposal. DuckDuckGo is seeing significant growth following Google's AI push. PC Gamer, via Hacker News, reports that DuckDuckGo's search saw nearly 28% more visits in the week following Google's insistence that people love AI mode. This is a substantial jump and suggests that a meaningful segment of users are actively seeking alternatives to AI-augmented search results. Many users are frustrated with how Google is now inserting AI-generated summaries at the top of search results, which they feel are often inaccurate, cite sources poorly, or simply get in the way of what they're looking for. DuckDuckGo has positioned itself as an AI-free alternative that focuses on traditional web search, and this appears to be resonating with users who prefer that approach. Simon Willison has a thought-provoking piece on Hacker News titled, "I think Anthropic and OpenAI have found product-market fit." This is generating extensive discussion with over 1,000 comments. Willison argues that despite ongoing debates about AI limitations and concerns, both companies now have clear product-market fit with developers and enterprises who are building AI features into their applications. He points to the sustained usage numbers, the growing ecosystem of applications built on their APIs, and the willingness of businesses to pay for these services as evidence. The discussion is fascinating, with some agreeing that we've reached an inflection point where AI assistants are genuinely useful for many workflows, while others argue this is still early days and we haven't seen true product-market fit yet. Ars Technica is reporting on a major business decision with significant political implications. They say NVIDIA is betting $150 billion on Taiwan as Trump's plan to make the US an AI hub backfires. NVIDIA's CEO has apparently stated that he wants Taiwan to be the center of the AI revolution, not the United States, and the company is making massive investments in Taiwanese manufacturing and research facilities. This represents a significant rebuke to the administration's efforts to reshore advanced chip manufacturing and AI development. The decision is driven by a combination of factors including Taiwan's existing semiconductor ecosystem, skilled workforce, and government support, as well as what some see as policy uncertainty in the United States. On the consumer technology front, Ars Technica reports that Roku OS home screen now features a large, permanent ad. This is the latest in a trend of smart TV platforms becoming increasingly aggressive with advertising. The ad takes up a significant portion of the home screen and cannot be removed or hidden by users. This is generating backlash from customers who feel they've already paid for the hardware and shouldn't be subjected to intrusive advertising on their own device's interface. It's part of a broader shift where hardware manufacturers are trying to monetize users after the initial sale through advertising and data collection. Now for our security briefing. CISA has been quite active this week, adding vulnerabilities to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, and we have some critical items that need immediate attention. Starting with the most urgent, CISA added CV 2000 and 26-48172 on May 26th with a due date of May 29th, that's tomorrow. This affects the Lightspeed cPanel plugin and is a privilege escalation vulnerability. What makes this particularly dangerous is that it's exposed via the user-end cPanel plugin, meaning any cPanel user can potentially abuse it to gain elevated privileges on the system. This can lead to full server compromise. If you're running cPanel with the Lightspeed plugin, you need to patch immediately. The short deadline indicates CISA is seeing active exploitation in the wild. Bleeping Computer is reporting on this same issue, stating that CISA is giving federal agencies just 4 days to patch this actively exploited cPanel plugin flaw. They note that while the directive is aimed at federal agencies, any organization using this software should treat this with the same urgency, as threat actors don't discriminate between government and private sector targets when they find a working exploit. CISA added CV 2000 and 26-8398 on May 27th with a due date of May 30th, that's this Saturday. This affects Daemon Tools Lite and contains what they're calling an unspecified vulnerability that has high impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The fact that they're not providing more details but still mandating rapid patching suggests this is being actively exploited, and they're trying to avoid giving attackers more information while defenders patch. If you have Daemon Tools deployed anywhere in your environment, you need to address this immediately. There are 2 supply chain compromise vulnerabilities that CISA added on May 27th. CV 2000 and 26-48027 affects NX console, and CV 2000 and 26-45321 affects TANstack. Both involve embedded malicious code that allowed compromised versions to be published to package registries. In the case of NX console, a malicious version was published and could steal credentials and other sensitive data. The TAN stack issues similarly involved malicious versions being published to the NPM registry that could exfiltrate credentials. Both have due dates of June 10th. This highlights the ongoing risk in the NPM and broader JavaScript ecosystem where supply chain attacks have become increasingly common. If you're using either of these packages, you need to audit your dependencies and ensure you're not running the compromised versions. Leaping Computer has a related story about GPU mining malware spreading via SEO poisoning and AI chatbots. Attackers are using search engine optimization techniques to get malicious sites ranked highly for common developer search terms, and they're also exploiting AI chatbots that might recommend or link to these compromised packages. When developers install what they think are legitimate packages, they're actually installing cryptocurrency miners that use their GPU resources to mine for the attackers. This is particularly insidious because it might not be immediately obvious. The malware is designed to throttle itself to avoid completely overwhelming the system, making it harder to detect. CV-2026-9082 was added on May 22nd and affects Drupal core. This is a SQL injection vulnerability that could allow privilege escalation and remote code execution via specially crafted requests. The due date is May 27th, which has already passed, so if you haven't patched your Drupal installations yet, you're overdue. SQL injection remains one of the most dangerous vulnerability classes because it can give attackers direct access to your database, allowing them to steal, modify, or delete data, and potentially pivot to full system compromise. SANS Internet Storm Center has been tracking something interesting. They've been reconstructing an Akira ransomware kill chain from perimeter and endpoint logs. They're walking through how the attackers gained initial access, moved laterally through the network, escalated privileges, and eventually deployed ransomware. This kind of detailed analysis is invaluable for defenders because it shows the specific techniques, tactics, and procedures that real ransomware groups are using. If you're in a security role, I'd recommend reading through their analysis and checking whether you have visibility into each stage of the attack they describe. Krebs on Security has several significant stories this week. First, the Netherlands has seized 800 servers and arrested 2 individuals for aiding cyberattacks. According to Krebs, this was a major operation targeting what was essentially a bulletproof hosting provider, a service that turns a blind eye to criminal activity and doesn't cooperate with law enforcement. These services are critical infrastructure for cybercriminals running everything from phishing campaigns to ransomware operations. Reddit's r/netsec community has a post noting that a week after the seizure, the hosting network's autonomous system number is still scanning at its normal daily rate, suggesting that while law enforcement seized the servers, they haven't fully disrupted the network's operations yet. Krebs is also reporting on lawmakers demanding answers as CISA tries to contain a data leak. Schneier on Security has more details on this, reporting that a CISA administrator leaked AWS Gov Cloud keys on GitHub. This is an extremely serious security incident because Gov Cloud is used for sensitive government workloads, and the exposed credentials could have given attackers access to government systems and data. The fact that this happened at CISA, the agency responsible for cybersecurity guidance across the federal government, makes it particularly embarrassing and concerning. Lawmakers are rightfully asking how this happened and what safeguards were in place, or weren't, to prevent this type of credential exposure. Krebs has another story about the alleged Kimwolf botmaster, known as Dort, being arrested and charged in both the United States and Canada. Kimwolf was a botnet used for distributed denial of service attacks, with Dort allegedly selling DDoS services to other criminals. This arrest is the result of a lengthy investigation involving multiple law enforcement agencies across 2 countries. Schneier on Security discusses the FBI's 2025 Internet Crime Report, which shows that internet crime losses continue to increase year over year. The report breaks down the most common types of scams, the demographics of victims, and financial losses by category. Business email compromise remains one of the costliest types of attacks, with median losses in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Schneier also has a fascinating piece on identifying people using Wi-Fi routers. Researchers have demonstrated that Wi-Fi routers emit slightly different signal characteristics based on hardware imperfections in their radio transmitters, essentially a unique fingerprint. By analyzing these characteristics, it's possible to track the same router even if it changes its MAC address or other identifiers. This has implications for privacy, as it could be used to track individuals' movements or link different online identities that are using the same physical router. He also covers a macOS kernel memory corruption exploit that was recently disclosed. This affects the macOS kernel and could allow an attacker who has already gained some level of access to escalate to kernel-level privileges, giving them complete control over the system. Apple has released patches, so macOS users need to ensure they're fully updated. Bleeping Computer reports on a significant law enforcement success. The Glassworm botnet has been disrupted after a resilient command and control infrastructure takedown. What made Glassworm particularly challenging to disrupt was its use of multiple redundant cTWO servers distributed across different hosting providers and geographic locations. Taking down one server would just cause the bots to connect to another. Law enforcement had to coordinate simultaneous takedown actions across multiple jurisdictions to successfully disrupt the botnet. Dutch police have arrested a suspect linked to the Ajax Football Club hack, according to Bleeping Computer. This attack involved unauthorized access to the club's systems, though details about what data was accessed or what the attacker's motives were haven't been fully disclosed yet. Bleeping Computer also reports that the FBI is warning about in-person data theft attacks from an extortion gang they're calling Silent Ransom. Rather than relying entirely on remote network intrusions, this group is reportedly conducting physical break-ins to steal hard drives and backup media, then using the stolen data for extortion. This represents an evolution in ransomware tactics and highlights that cybersecurity can't purely focus on network defenses. You also need physical security controls around where sensitive data is stored. Palo Alto's Unit 42 has several research pieces worth noting. They're tracking an Iranian apt group they call Screening Serpents and its 2026 espionage campaigns. This group is targeting organizations in the Middle East and appears to be focused on intelligence collection related to regional political and military matters. Unit 42 also has a piece on ROAD tools and nation-state tactics in the cloud, discussing how sophisticated attackers are using legitimate Azure AD reconnaissance tools for malicious purposes. They're also discussing the evolving cyber extortion economy and how the business model around ransomware and data theft is continuing to develop. On the patch front, Bleeping Computer reports that Windows 11 has received update KB5,089,573, which includes performance improvements. Krebs on Security covered Patch Tuesday for May 2026, noting the various security updates Microsoft released. As always, prioritize patching based on whether systems are internet-facing, the criticality of affected services, and whether exploits are publicly available or active exploitation is occurring. That wraps up the first half of today's show. When we come back, we'll dive into NASA news, some fascinating AI and machine learning research, and we'll look at what's trending on GitHub and across social media. Stay with us. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Clovis Brief. Today is Thursday, May 28, 2026, and you're listening to the second half of today's show. Let's dive into our home lab and infrastructure segment. Starting with some major developments in container security, there's been significant discussion this week around Docker and Kubernetes supply chain vulnerabilities. Over on Reddit's HomeLab community, there's a fascinating thread with over 800 upvotes about someone who found server equipment by a dumpster. This kicked off a great conversation about properly sanitizing and securing secondhand hardware before bringing it into your home network. Always wipe drives, update firmware, and check for backdoored BIOS settings before trusting recycled enterprise gear. GitHub trending this week shows some interesting projects gaining traction. Money Printer Turbo, a tool for automated video generation, has been climbing the charts. While that's more content creation than infrastructure, what caught my eye is the underlying architecture discussion happening in the issues. People are deploying this on home Kubernetes clusters and running into interesting problems with GPU scheduling and resource limits. Speaking of GPUs, there's been active development in the containerization of GPU workloads. The Understand Anything project on GitHub is getting attention for its approach to making AI models more accessible in home lab environments. This ties into a broader trend we're seeing where serious AI inference is moving from purely cloud-based to hybrid deployments. People want to run models locally for privacy and cost reasons, but that means dealing with the complexity of GPU pass-through in Docker, proper CUDA driver management in containers, and making sure your cooling is adequate for sustained loads. Anthropic released some interesting knowledge work plugins this week, available on their GitHub. These are designed to integrate Claude into various enterprise workflows, but the architecture is clean enough that HomeLab enthusiasts are already adapting them for self-hosted solutions. The plugin framework uses a straightforward REST API design that plays nicely with reverse proxies like Nginx or Traefik. On the networking front, there's renewed discussion about mesh networks. Someone over on Hacker News shared a detailed post about getting into Meshtastic, Meshcore, and Reticulum. Meshtastic in particular has been gaining serious traction as a resilient, off-grid communication option. The protocol runs on inexpensive LoRa hardware and can create mesh networks that route around internet outages or infrastructure failures. For those running comprehensive home labs, integrating a Meshtastic node into your monitoring stack gives you an out-of-band communication channel that doesn't depend on your ISP. The post walks through the hardware options, firmware flashing, and integration with Home Assistant. The author notes that Reticulum offers even more flexibility if you're willing to work with Python and don't mind a steeper learning curve. These mesh protocols are particularly interesting for folks in areas with questionable internet reliability or for anyone who takes disaster preparedness seriously. Let's talk about Ahead Inc. resources. They've published several significant pieces this week. First, there's a new white paper on their physical AI factory concept. This is a hybrid roadmap for sustainable autonomous vehicle and advanced driver assistance system development. What makes this relevant to infrastructure professionals is their approach to liquid cooling and power distribution at scale. Even if you're not deploying AV systems, the architectural patterns they discuss apply to any high-density compute environment. They've also released an executive playbook for liquid-cooled infrastructure specifically targeting AI workloads. This is actually practical guidance, not marketing fluff. They cover facility requirements, power considerations, coolant selection, and importantly, the economic trade-offs between air cooling and liquid cooling at different scales. If you're planning GPU expansion in your home lab or at work, this document will save you from some expensive mistakes. Ahead published benchmarking data on single-card LLM inference using Intel Gaudi 3 accelerators. This is interesting because most of the AI infrastructure conversation has been dominated by NVIDIA, but Intel is making a serious push into this space. The benchmarks focus on enterprise workloads, which means they're actually useful, not the cherry-picked synthetic benchmarks you sometimes see. They tested with real model architectures and measured end-to-end latency, throughput, and power consumption. One more from Ahead that's worth mentioning, they published a piece on reimagining IT operations with agentic AI. This discusses using AI agents to handle routine operational tasks, troubleshooting, and even some security response functions. The key insight is that agent frameworks need to be tightly integrated with your observability stack. An agent that can read metrics, logs, and traces, correlate them, and take action based on runbooks can significantly reduce mean time to resolution. They walk through implementation patterns using ServiceNow and various open-source tools. Speaking of ServiceNow, Ahead also published a Knowledge 2026 recap that cuts through the conference announcements to focus on what actually matters for production deployments. If you're running ServiceNow in your organization, this is worth reading. On the Proxmox front, there have been some interesting discussions this week about clustering and high availability configurations. The Reddit HomeLab community has been troubleshooting Ceph deployments, which always generates good technical discussion. Ceph is powerful but complex, and getting the networking right is critical. Make sure you have dedicated networks for Ceph storage traffic, separate from your VM migration network and management network. Also, monitor your disk latency religiously. Ceph performance falls off a cliff if you have a slow disk in the cluster. For those running on RAID, there's been chatter about the latest stable release and its improved Docker management interface. Unraid continues to be a great option for media servers and mixed workloads where you don't need the hardcore clustering features of Proxmox, but want more flexibility than a basic NAS. One more infrastructure note, there was a significant GitHub incident this week affecting pull requests, issues, Git operations, and API requests. This got nearly 400 comments on Hacker News, with people discussing their dependency on GitHub and the lack of viable alternatives for large-scale collaboration. GitHub's status page has the technical details. The incident lasted several hours and impacted automated workflows for a lot of organizations. This is a good reminder to have offline copies of your critical repositories and not to let your entire deployment pipeline depend on a single SaaS provider's availability. Now let's move into our AI and machine learning segment. The archive had some fascinating papers dropped this week. Let's start with Archive 2605.28819 PEFT Arena. Understanding parameter-efficient fine-tuning from a stability-plasticity perspective. This paper tackles a fundamental challenge in adapting large language models. When you fine-tune a model, you're walking a tightrope between catastrophic forgetting, where the model loses its original capabilities, and insufficient adaptation to the new task. Parameter-efficient fine-tuning methods like LoRa have become popular because they require less compute and memory. But this paper introduces a new evaluation framework called PEFT Arena that systematically measures the stability-plasticity trade-off across different methods. The researchers found that not all PEFT methods are created equal. Some preserve general capabilities better while others are more effective at learning new tasks. This matters because choosing the right fine-tuning approach for your use case can dramatically affect model performance. Next up is Archive 2605.28812, Beyond Binary, Sim-to-Real Dexterous Manipulation with Physics-Grounded Contact Representation. This is robotics research, but it has implications for anyone working with reinforcement learning and simulation. The primary bottleneck in contact-rich manipulation, like a robot hand picking up and manipulating objects, is getting enough real-world training data. This paper presents a sim-to-real RL approach that uses a physics-grounded representation of contact forces. What makes this interesting is how they bridge the reality gap. Simulations are always imperfect, but by focusing on contact mechanics and using a more sophisticated physical model, they achieved much better transfer to real hardware. If you're working on any kind of physical AI system, whether that's robotics, autonomous vehicles, or industrial automation, understanding how to leverage simulation more effectively is crucial. Now Archive 2605.2881, Effective Music Recommendation, a rollout-based world model for offline preference optimization. This paper addresses a distinctive recommendation problem in functional music applications. Whether it's music for focus, sleep, or clinical interventions, success depends on the effective state you're trying to achieve. Traditional recommendation systems optimize for engagement or clicks, but that's not the right metric here. The researchers developed a world model approach that can learn from offline preference data and predict how different music selections will affect a user's emotional or cognitive state over time. The rollout-based optimization means the system looks ahead multiple steps rather than just optimizing for the immediate next track. This has applications beyond music. Any recommendation system where the goal is a sustained state change rather than moment-to-moment engagement could benefit from this approach. Let's talk about Archive 2605.28809, Area, Attribute Extraction and Aggregation for Clip-Based Class-Incremental Learning. Class-incremental learning is important for real-world systems that need to learn new categories without forgetting old ones. Clip-based approaches have shown promise, but this paper introduces Area, which explicitly extracts and aggregates attributes rather than treating classes as monolithic entities. The key insight is that many classes share attributes. For instance, different types of vehicles might share as wheels or metallic surface. By decomposing classes into attributes and learning those incrementally, the system preserves general knowledge better while still adapting to new categories. This is particularly relevant for edge AI applications where you can't retrain from scratch every time you add a new class. Now Archive 2605.28807, Calibrating Conservatism for Scalable Oversight. This paper tackles a fundamental control problem for agentic AI systems. When you have AI agents that can autonomously plan and interact with their environment, how do you maintain meaningful human oversight? The researchers propose calibrating the agent's conservatism. Essentially, its willingness to take actions without human approval based on the stakes and the agent's confidence. High-stakes decisions or low-confidence situations trigger more oversight, while routine, high-confidence actions proceed autonomously. They formalize this as a learned threshold policy that adapts over time. This is critical work for anyone deploying AI agents in production, whether that's for IT operations, customer service, or any other domain where you need the efficiency of automation but can't afford unchecked autonomy. Finally, Archive A2605.28805, Omni Verifier Mode, Multimodal Meta Verifier with Explicit Structured Recalibration. As visual outputs become increasingly central to multimodal large language models, reliable verification becomes essential. This paper introduces Omni Verifier, which performs fine-grained verification of visual generations. What sets it apart is the explicit structured recalibration. Rather than just outputting a confidence score, it identifies specific issues and can suggest corrections. For anyone building systems that generate images, diagrams, or other visual content using AI, having a reliable verifier in the pipeline is crucial for quality control. Switching gears to broader AI industry news, Anthropic's knowledge work plugins that I mentioned earlier represent an interesting strategic direction. They're not just building a chatbot. They're building infrastructure for AI-augmented workflows. The plugin architecture allows Claude to integrate with tools like version control systems, issue trackers, and documentation platforms. What makes this different from simple API calls is the context management. The system maintains awareness of the larger workflow and can make intelligent decisions about when to fetch information versus when to proceed with what it knows. YouTube announced this week that they'll be automatically labeling AI-generated videos. This is according to Hacker News, where the story got nearly 900 points. The implementation uses a combination of metadata declarations from creators and content analysis. This is part of a broader push for AI content transparency across platforms. The challenge, of course, is that the labels only work if creators comply voluntarily or if the detection algorithms are accurate. Given how sophisticated generative models have become, detection is an arms race. There's been significant discussion this week about whether Anthropic and OpenAI have found product-market fit. Simon Willison wrote a piece that got nearly 900 points on Hacker News and over 1,000 comments. His argument is that we're past the experimental phase for certain use cases. Code assistance, content drafting, complex queries over private data, and customer service automation are all seeing genuine adoption and retention. The counter-argument in the comments is that much of this usage is subsidized by unsustainably low pricing, and we haven't seen what happens when these services need to be priced for profitability. It's a fair point. The AI companies have been burning capital to build market share, and eventually the economics need to work. DuckDuckGo reported a 28% increase in visits the week after Google doubled down on AI mode in search. This is according to PC Gamer, citing DuckDuckGo's data. The story on Hacker News generated over 400 comments, mostly from people frustrated with AI-generated summaries in their search results. The core complaint is that users often want direct links to sources, not a synthesis. When you're doing research or troubleshooting, you want multiple perspectives and the ability to evaluate source credibility yourself. An AI summary, even an accurate one, removes that agency. This ties into a larger conversation about search engines and their role. Traditional search engines indexed the web and provided ranked links. Modern AI-enhanced search attempts to answer questions directly. That's more convenient for simple queries but potentially problematic for complex research. It also raises questions about attribution and traffic to content creators. If the AI provides the answer on the search page, why would a user click through to the source? This could undermine the economic model that supports a lot of online content creation. Over on Hacker News, there was also a story about websites using a new tracking technique, analyzing visitors' SSD activity. Ars Technica reported on this, and it's gotten a lot of attention in the security community. The technique exploits timing variations in file system operations to fingerprint devices. It's similar to canvas fingerprinting, but harder to block. The implications for privacy are significant because this kind of tracking doesn't rely on cookies or local storage. It's a side-channel attack against the browser's isolation model. Expect browsers to start adding protections, but it's always a cat-and-mouse game with these techniques. GPU mining malware is spreading via SEO poisoning and AI chatbots, according to Bleeping Computer. Attackers are using both traditional SEO manipulation and newer techniques like poisoning AI chatbot training data or responses to get victims to download malware. Once installed, the malware uses the victim's GPU to mine cryptocurrency. This is particularly effective against gaming PCs and workstations with high-end graphics cards. The mining often runs at reduced intensity to avoid immediate detection, slowly stealing compute cycles over weeks or months. If your GPU utilization is higher than expected when idle, investigate. Let's move into science and space. NASA had some significant announcements this week. First, they published a story titled "A Shift in What's Shaping U.S. Landscapes" that examines long-term land use changes visible from satellite imagery. The analysis uses data from Landsat and other Earth observation missions to track how development, agriculture, climate change, and natural disasters are reshaping American geography. One striking finding is the accelerating pace of change in the last decade compared to previous periods. This isn't just academic. Understanding these patterns is crucial for infrastructure planning, water resource management, and climate adaptation. NASA also announced that they've developed a sensor to improve firefighter safety, according to their Wildland Fire Management Program. The sensor monitors environmental conditions and can alert firefighters to dangerous fire behavior before it becomes life-threatening. Given the increasing intensity and frequency of wildfires, particularly in the western United States, this kind of technology could save lives. The sensor package is lightweight enough to be deployed on drones or carried by ground teams, and it integrates with incident command systems to provide real-time situational awareness. In procurement news, NASA Goddard issued a draft request for proposal for the Landsat 10 spacecraft. Landsat is America's longest-running Earth observation program, with continuous data going back to 1972. Landsat 10 will ensure continuity of this critical data record while adding improved sensors and capabilities. For anyone working with satellite imagery, climate data, or geographic information systems, the Landsat program is foundational. The draft RFP signals that the mission is moving forward through the development pipeline. NASA also provided updates on lunar surface missions, including rovers, landers, and elements of the Artemis base architecture. This Spanish-language announcement was posted to NASA's news feed. The Artemis program aims to establish a sustained human presence on the Moon by the early 2030s, which requires significant robotic infrastructure. These rovers and landers will do reconnaissance, resource prospecting, and preparation work before crewed missions arrive. The emphasis on lunar resource utilization, particularly water ice extraction and processing, suggests NASA is serious about reducing dependence on Earth-supplied consumables. The Girl Scouts held an event bringing space science to the next generation, according to NASA's Science Activation Program. These outreach events are important for maintaining public support for space exploration and inspiring the next generation of scientists and engineers. The activities included hands-on experiments, virtual reality experiences of lunar and Martian environments, and discussions with working space scientists. It's easy to be cynical about outreach, but programs like this genuinely do change lives. Many people in aerospace can trace their career trajectory back to a single inspirational event or mentor when they were young. Let's talk about NASA's astronomy picture of the day. Unfortunately, the specific content isn't detailed in today's feed, but the APOD program has been running since 1995 and consistently provides stunning imagery with detailed explanations. If you're not subscribed to APOD, I highly recommend it. Every day you get a different image, sometimes from ground-based telescopes, sometimes from space missions, sometimes from amateur astronomers, along with an explanation written by professional astronomers. It's one of the best ways to keep up with what's happening in observational astronomy. In broader space news, there's been significant activity in commercial space this week, though it's not in today's feed. SpaceX continues high-cadence Starlink launches, and there's growing discussion about orbital debris management as the low Earth orbit environment becomes more crowded. The Federal Communications Commission is starting to take a more active role in requiring deorbit plans and setting standards for satellite lifetimes. Shifting to Earth science, the World Meteorological Organization released a report this week, reported by the Associated Press, warning that the next 5 years are expected to smash temperature records. We're in a strong climate warming trend, exacerbated by El Niño conditions in the Pacific. This has implications for everything from agriculture to energy demand to extreme weather frequency. The scientific consensus is increasingly clear, and the effects are becoming harder to ignore even for skeptics. There was also a tragic reminder of heatwave dangers this week. According to the BBC, a boy found in a pond is the 10th water-related death in the current heatwave. As temperatures rise, especially in regions not accustomed to extreme heat, people make dangerous decisions trying to cool off. Ponds, rivers, and reservoirs that look inviting can have strong currents, cold temperatures below the surface, or steep drop-offs. Public health messaging around heat waves needs to emphasize not just hydration and air conditioning, but also the specific dangers of uncontrolled swimming. Now let's cover business and the economy. Market conditions remain volatile this week, with energy prices being a primary driver. Bloomberg reported that oil prices are pushing higher following U.S. strikes in Iran. Treasury yields are resuming their decline as investors seek safe haven assets. This creates a challenging environment for equities. Rising energy costs hurt corporate margins, while geopolitical uncertainty makes investors risk-averse. NVIDIA made a significant announcement this week. According to Ars Technica, the company is betting $150 billion on Taiwan as the center of AI development, even as the Trump administration has been trying to make the United States the hub for AI. This is a massive vote of confidence in Taiwan's semiconductor ecosystem and a tacit acknowledgement that you can't easily replicate the density of expertise and infrastructure that exists there. For NVIDIA, it makes business sense. Taiwan has TSMC, the world's most advanced chip manufacturer, along with a deep bench of component suppliers and design talent. But it does create strategic vulnerability given the geopolitical tensions around Taiwan. This decision reportedly comes as Trump's plan to make the U.S. an AI hub has faced challenges. Building advanced semiconductor fabrication facilities takes years and billions of dollars in investment. The expertise required isn't something you can easily move or replicate. While there are significant efforts to onshore more chip production, including major TSMC facilities being built in Arizona, the center of gravity for the most advanced manufacturing remains in Asia. Speaking of AI infrastructure, J.P. Morgan strategists are saying that a retail revival is adding fuel to U.S. stocks, according to Bloomberg. Consumer spending has remained surprisingly resilient despite high interest rates and inflation. This is supporting equity valuations in the retail sector and providing some optimism for the broader economy. However, there's debate about how sustainable this is. Are consumers spending down savings, or is this a sign of genuine economic strength? Korea's National Pension Fund announced it's raising its domestic stock target as the Kospi soars. This is interesting because it represents a bet on Korean equities at a time when many international investors have been cautious about Asian markets. The Kospi has been driven higher by strong performance in technology and manufacturing stocks, particularly those tied to the semiconductor supply chain and electric vehicle production. In IPO news, drone makers Quantum and Destinus are seeking banks for potential 2027 offerings, according to Bloomberg. This reflects growing investor interest in the drone sector as applications expand beyond hobbyist and basic photography uses into delivery, inspection, surveillance, and autonomous systems. Both companies are focusing on commercial and industrial applications where the regulatory environment is becoming more favorable and the business cases are getting stronger. Turning to tech industry employment, there's been a wave of restructuring across multiple companies this year. While not as dramatic as the mass layoffs of 2023 and 2024, companies are continuing to adjust headcount and focus. The AI boom has created hiring in some areas while traditional software engineering roles have seen reduced demand. This is creating an interesting bifurcation in the job market. If you have expertise in machine learning, large language models, or AI infrastructure, you're in high demand. Traditional web development and IT support roles face more competition. There was an interesting story on ABC News about whether AI is to blame for hiring woes faced by college graduates. The argument is that automated resume screening and AI-powered applicant tracking systems are making it harder for candidates to get through to human reviewers. These systems often filter based on keyword matching and pattern recognition that may not capture qualified candidates who don't fit a narrow template. This is particularly hard on recent graduates who don't have extensive work history. The flip side is that companies are drowning in applications and need some way to filter. The solution probably involves both better AI systems that can evaluate candidates more holistically and changes to how we think about hiring and candidate evaluation. In housing and real estate, markets remain tight in most major metropolitan areas. High interest rates have cooled the market somewhat compared to the frenzy of 2020 through 2022, but prices remain elevated and inventory is limited. For the Chicago area specifically, we're seeing seasonal upticks in listings as we head into summer, but affordability remains a challenge for first-time buyers. Inflation has moderated from its peak but remains above the Federal Reserve's target. Energy prices are a wild card. If oil continues rising due to Middle East tensions, that could reignite broader inflation. The Fed is in a difficult position, balancing the need to keep inflation under control against the risk of tipping the economy into recession through overly aggressive rate policy. And that brings us to the end of today's show. Thank you for joining me for the Clovis Brief on this Thursday, May 28th. We covered a lot of ground today, from infrastructure and AI research to space exploration and economic news. It's a complicated world we're living in, but staying informed and thinking critically about these developments helps us navigate it. Tomorrow we'll be diving into some interesting developments in the AI regulation space, plus I've got some updates on local events happening here in the Chicago area that you won't want to miss. We'll also be looking at some fascinating new research in quantum computing that just dropped on Archive. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay secure. This has been the Clovis Brief. I'm your host, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.